When communication suddenly stops, something powerful happens beneath the surface. The constant emotional noise fades away. The late night messages, the explanations, the arguments, the reassurance, everything that once filled the space between two people disappears. And in that silence, the mind finally has room to breathe. Silence doesn't erase connection, it strips it down to its truth. When you are no longer speaking, she is no longer reacting. Instead, she begins reflecting. While you were present, her attention was divided between what you said, how you said it, and how she should respond. Silence removes that distraction. Without your voice guiding the emotional direction, her thoughts begin to move on their own. She starts replaying moments instead of conversations. She remembers how she felt when you were around, not what you argued about last. Memory is emotional, not logical, and silence gives memory the space to work. This is where absence becomes meaningful. When you're always available, your presence blends into routine. It becomes predictable, expected, and emotionally invisible. Silence interrupts that pattern. Suddenly, there is a noticeable gap where your energy used to be. The small things stand out, the way you listened, the calm you brought, the way you showed up without being asked. These realizations rarely happen while someone is still there. They happen when something familiar is missing. Silence also removes resistance. When you keep talking, explaining, or trying to be understood, you unknowingly create pressure. Pressure pushes people away. Silence releases that pressure completely. There is no demand, no expectation, no emotional pull. In that freedom, her emotions are allowed to surface honestly. If there is longing, it emerges naturally. If there is attachment, it becomes clear to her without persuasion. Another quiet shift happens during this time. The mind has a natural tendency to seek closure, and silence denies it. When there are no final words or constant updates, the story feels unfinished. That open loop keeps the connection alive in her thoughts. Not in a dramatic or obsessive way, but in a subtle, lingering curiosity. She begins wondering what you're doing, how you're feeling, and why the silence feels heavier than expected. This reflection is not about manipulation or strategy. Coach, it's about emotional contrast. When noise disappears, what remains becomes louder. If the connection had depth, silence amplifies it. If there was comfort, stability, or emotional safety, its absence becomes noticeable. Silence doesn't create feelings that weren't there. It reveals the ones that already existed but were buried under routine and familiarity. At the same time, silence forces a comparison. Life continues as usual, but something feels different. Conversations with others don't land the same way. Support from elsewhere doesn't feel identical. That's when the realization begins not everyone offers the same emotional presence. And that understanding can only come when the original presence is no longer available. The most important part is this silence works because it is calm, not reactive. It is not punishment, and it is not a message sent to provoke a response. It is simply the absence of interference. And in that absence, truth surfaces on its own terms. If she misses you, it's because the silence reminded her of what mattered when you were there. And if nothing else, silence gives both people the clarity they could never find while still talking. There is a moment when you stop reaching out and it feels uncomfortable at first. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're breaking a familiar pattern. For a long time, you may have been the one initiating conversations, explaining your intentions, or trying to keep the emotional connection alive. Silence in that moment is not about withdrawal, it is about restraint. And restraint is one of the clearest signs of inner strength. When you choose silence instead of chasing, the emotional balance shifts. Chasing places you in a reactive position, always responding to moods, delays, or mixed signals. Silence removes you from that loop. You are no longer trying to manage how you are perceived or hoping for a specific reaction. That calm disengagement sends a quiet but powerful message: you value yourself enough to step back without drama. This is where self control becomes visible. Anyone can speak when emotions are high. Anyone can send messages out of frustration or fear of losing someone. Very few can pause, regulate themselves, and choose stillness instead. Silence shows that your emotions do not control you, you control them, and emotional maturity is deeply attractive because it signals stability rather than dependency. As the dynamic changes, something else happens. The absence of pursuit removes pressure, but it also removes certainty. When you stop chasing, you stop reassuring, you stop confirming your availability. That uncertainty naturally triggers curiosity. She may begin to wonder why you haven't reached out, not because she wants attention, but because the familiar dynamic has shifted. Silence introduces a new rhythm, and the mind notices change more than consistency. This shift is not about power in a manipulative sense, it's about reclaiming your own center. When you are always the one reaching out, your emotional state becomes dependent on responses, replies, and reactions. Silence breaks that dependence. It recenters your focus on your own life, your own direction, and your own emotional regulation. That grounded energy is felt even without words. Silence also creates contrast between emotional need and emotional choice. When someone chases, it often communicates need, even if unintentionally. When someone steps back calmly, it communicates choice. You are not disappearing because you are hurt or angry. You are simply choosing not to overextend yourself. That distinction matters. People respect what is chosen, not what is demanded. In many cases, this is when respect begins to grow. Respect doesn't come from convincing someone of your worth, it comes from demonstrating boundaries without hostility. Silence is a boundary that requires no explanation. It says, I won't beg for attention and I won't force connection. That quiet confidence is far more impactful than any emotional argument. Over time, the emotional frame shifts. Instead of you wondering how to keep her engaged, she may start wondering what changed. Instead of you proving your value, your absence invites reflection. That's the paradox. By doing less, you reveal more. You reveal that your life continues, that your emotional stability does not depend on one person's response. This is why silence can lead to longing, not because it creates fear, but because it creates respect. Longing rarely grows from desperation, it grows from the realization that someone who once offered presence is no longer trying to earn a place. That realization often awakens appreciation. And even if it doesn't, silence still serves its highest purpose. It restores your self respect and emotional balance. When communication continues without pause, emotions rarely get the chance to settle. Words keep things moving, but they also keep things distorted. Every message, every explanation, every attempt to clarify feelings can unintentionally steer emotions in a certain direction. Silence removes that influence. It creates a space where emotions are no longer shaped by reassurance, persuasion, or reaction, but are allowed to rise on their own. As long as you are present and engaging, her emotional responses are often tied to the moment. She reacts to what you say, how you say it, and what it triggers in her right then. That reaction can mask what she truly feels beneath the surface. Silence interrupts that cycle. Without your voice filling the gaps, her mind no longer reacts, it reflects. And reflection is where honest emotion lives. This space is important because emotions need stillness to be understood. When someone is constantly communicating, they are unconsciously guiding the emotional outcome. Even simple messages can influence guilt, comfort, relief, or confusion. Silence takes away that guidance. There is no emotional cue to follow, no reassurance to lean on, no pressure to respond a certain way. What remains is her own emotional truth. And that quiet, feelings that were suppressed or postponed begin to surface. She may realize she feels unsettled, or she may feel unexpectedly calm. She may feel the absence more strongly than anticipated, or she may recognize that something important has shifted. Whatever arises is real because it wasn't prompted. Silence allows emotions to speak without interference. This is why silence is not about making someone miss you through tactics. It's about letting them feel what they already feel without interruption. If there is attachment, silence brings it to the surface. If there is indifference, silence reveals that too. And while that can be uncomfortable, it is also honest. Truth only shows itself when it is not being managed. Another subtle effect of silence is that it removes emotional defense. When conversations continue, people often stay guarded. They protect themselves through distance, logic, or mixed signals. Silence lowers those defenses because there is nothing to push against. With no argument to win or expectation to meet, emotions soften. That's when vulnerability can quietly emerge, even if it's only internal at first. Silence also gives her ownership of her feelings. When you keep communicating, she may feel emotionally led or influenced. When you step back, she becomes responsible for how she feels. That responsibility often deepens awareness. She can no longer blame confusion on mixed messages or emotional pressure. She must confront what she actually misses or doesn't. This process takes time. That's why silence cannot be rushed. Emotions don't surface on a schedule. They unfold as the mind adjusts to absence. At first, there may be distraction, then curiosity, then awareness. Silence supports this natural progression without forcing an outcome. It respects emotional autonomy rather than trying to control it. The most important part is that whatever conclusion she reaches will feel authentic to her. If she misses you, it will not be because you convinced her, persuaded her, or stayed visible. It will be because the silence allowed her heart to speak without interruption. And that kind of realization, when it happens, carries far more weight than anything words could have achieved. Value is rarely recognized in real time. When something is consistently present, the mind adjusts and stops actively noticing it. Emotional effort becomes background noise, not because it lacks importance, but because it feels guaranteed. Silence disrupts that illusion. Coach. When your presence is removed, the contrast between what existed and what now feels absent becomes impossible to ignore. While you were there, your attention, stability, or emotional support may have felt normal, almost automatic. There was no urgency to measure its worth because it seemed constant. Silence removes that certainty. The emotional environment changes, and with that change comes awareness. Conversations feel different. Moments that once felt supported now feel quieter. The shift is subtle at first, but it grows louder over time. Absence creates a comparison the mind cannot avoid. She may find herself interacting with others and noticing that something feels off. Not better, not worse, just different. The way you listened, the way you responded, the emotional safety you offered becomes clearer in contrast. Value is not understood in isolation, it's understood through difference. Silence provides that difference without saying a word. This is where memory begins to work differently. Instead of recalling surface level interactions, she remembers how your presence made her feel. Emotional memory is selective. It filters out the noise and holds on to impact. Silence allows those emotional imprints to rise because there is nothing new replacing them. What once blended into routine now stands out as meaningful. Silence also removes the chance for you to prove your worth verbally. And that absence of proof is exactly what gives it weight. When you stop explaining, justifying, or showing up on demand, your value is no longer being demonstrated, it's being measured. People only measure what they fear losing. Silence creates that moment of measurement naturally. Another shift happens when expectations are broken. If you are always available, your silence disrupts that expectation. The mind tries to make sense of the change, it asks quiet questions. Why does this feel different? Why do I notice this now? Why does the absence feel heavier than expected? Those questions pull attention toward what is missing, not what is present. This contrast also reveals emotional dependence versus emotional appreciation. When you were there, it may have been easy to assume you would always be. Silence challenges that assumption. And in that challenge, appreciation can grow, not because of guilt or pressure, but because of realization. Realization carries emotional weight because it comes from within. Silence doesn't exaggerate your value, it clarifies it. If your presence added peace, grounding, or consistency, its absence highlights that contribution. If the connection to depth, silence sharpens the awareness of that depth. If it didn't, silence exposes that too. Either way, truth becomes visible. The most important part is that this realization happens without influence. You are not reminding her of what you offered. You are not asking to be missed. The absence does the work quietly. And when value is recognized in silence, it is felt more deeply because it was discovered, not demanded. That is how silence turns presence into perspective and absence into understanding. Silence has a way of revealing what words often hide. When communication stops, there is nothing left to smooth over, imbalance, or compensate for uneven effort. No one is checking in, no one is chasing, no one is holding the connection together through sheer persistence. What remains is the truth of the bond itself. Silence doesn't create distance, it uncovers whether distance was already there. In many connections, one person gives more emotional energy than the other. As long as communication continues, that imbalance can go unnoticed. Messages keep flowing, interactions keep happening, and the illusion of mutual effort stays intact. Silence removes the glue. If the connection was real and reciprocal, it doesn't vanish the moment talking stops. If it was one sided, it fades quickly. That clarity is uncomfortable, but is also freeing. When you step into silence, you stop carrying the emotional weight alone. You are no longer filling gaps, fixing moods, or initiating contact to keep things alive. This shift exposes how much the other person is willing to invest when nothing is being offered first. If she reaches out, reflects, or shows concern, it signals genuine attachment. If she remains distant, silence confirms what words may have denied. This exposure is not a test and it is not a tactic. It is simply the absence of effort revealing the natural level of investment. Silence allows emotions to act rather than be talked into existence. Real interest moves on its own. It doesn't need reminders or explanation. When someone cares, silence feels noticeable. When they don't, silence feels convenient. Another important aspect of silence is that it removes emotional bargaining. When conversations continue during uncertainty, people often negotiate their needs indirectly. They compromise self respect for closeness, hoping consistency will eventually create certainty. Silence ends a negotiation. It draws a clear line between what is mutual and what is forced. That line protects your dignity. This is where clarity replaces confusion. Instead of wondering how she feels, you observe how she acts. Instead of interpreting mixed signals, you see consistent behavior. Silence turns speculation into evidence. And evidence is far easier to accept than emotional hope. Even when the realization is painful, silence prevents prolonged emotional drain. It stops you from investing in a connection that requires constant maintenance from one side. It stops you from chasing potential instead of reality, and it gives you the space to redirect your energy toward growth rather than uncertainty. Silence also teaches you something about yourself. It shows you that your worth does not come from being needed to sustain a connection. It comes from choosing connections that meet you halfway. That awareness strengthens boundaries and reshapes future relationships. If she responds to silence with reflection, warmth, or effort, the connection gains a new foundation, one built on choice rather than habit. If she doesn't, silence gives you closure without confrontation. Either outcome is progress because both move you closer to truth. Silence doesn't guarantee reunion, but it guarantees clarity, and clarity is always a form of respect. Silence only becomes powerful when it is supported by movement, not waiting. When you stop speaking but remain emotionally frozen, silence turns heavy and ineffective. It becomes hope disguised as patience. Real silence, the kind that carries weight, is active on the inside even though it looks quiet on the outside. It is the redirection of energy away from someone else and back toward your own life. The mistake many people make is believing silence is about doing nothing. It isn't. It is about doing something different. Instead of checking your phone, you build structure. Instead of replaying conversations, you focus on purpose. Instead of measuring time, you invest it. Silence works when it comes from fullness, not lack. When you grow during silence, your emotional state changes. You become less reactive and more grounded. Your sense of worth stops depending on whether someone reaches out. This internal shift is subtle, but it is real. And when your energy changes, people feel it even without contact. Growth alters presence, and presence alters perception. Self growth also removes hidden expectations. If silence is used with the hope of a specific outcome, it carries tension. That tension leaks through your actions if contact resumes. But when silence is paired with genuine progress, there is no pressure. You are no longer waiting to be chosen. You are choosing yourself. That shift creates emotional freedom. This is why silence paired with growth feels different. It is calm, not forced. There is no bitterness, no silent protest, no internal countdown. You are moving forward regardless of the outcome. And paradoxically, that is when silence becomes most attractive because it signals independence rather than attachment. If she reaches out during this phase, she doesn't return to the same version of you. She meets someone more stable, more self aware, and less available for emotional imbalance. The dynamic has changed because you have changed. Connection, if it resumes, coach, is built on respect rather than fear of loss. And if she doesn't reach out, growth ensures the silence was not wasted. You are already aligned with a better direction. You are no longer stuck in emotional limbo. Silence becomes a bridge, not a pause. A transition from uncertainty to clarity. The real win of silence is not whether someone comes back, it is that you come back to yourself. When silence is rooted in growth, it works regardless of the outcome because it always moves you forward.